The plate of roast chicken and mashed potatoes flew across the dining table, crashing into the wall behind me with a sickening splat. "A girlfriend? You have a girlfriend?" my father bellowed, his voice echoing through our suburban Texas home like thunder from the pulpit he preached at every Sunday. Sauce dripped down the floral wallpaper my mother had picked out to keep the house looking perfect for church potlucks, and the smell of garlic and regret filled the air. Tiffany sat beside me, her hand still warm in mine under the table until that moment, her blue eyes wide with the same fear that gripped my chest. I had planned this dinner for weeks, introducing her as my study buddy, from the University of Texas. We were both 22, both majoring in psychology, both hiding something far bigger than late-night cram sessions. But Dad had come home early from his shift at the auto plant and walked straight into the kitchen where we stole one quick kiss. Now the truth hung between us like the broken plate shards on the floor. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, her Sunday dress suddenly too bright for the horror on her face. My younger brother Jake froze with his fork halfway to his lips, and my older sister Emily looked ready to bolt for her phone to call the pastor. Then grandmother spoke, or rather she didn't. She simply set down her glass of sweet tea, folded her wrinkled hands in her lap, and looked at each of us in turn with those steady gray eyes that had seen 3 wars and 4 grandchildren grow up in this same house. The silence that followed her calm stare was heavier than any shout. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if her quiet presence had pressed pause on the entire world. I felt my stomach twist because I knew that look. It was the same one she gave when Grandpa died, when the church burned down in '09, when life handed out pain and she refused to let it break the family. But this time the pain was me. My mind raced back to the first time I met Tiffany in freshman orientation. She had laughed at my terrible joke about Freud, and something inside me clicked into place for the first time in my life. I had grown up reciting Bible verses at dinner, memorizing proverbs about the way of the righteous, and believing that love was only supposed to look one way, between a man and a woman, blessed by God and the community. Yet here I was, heart pounding for a girl whose smile made the world feel right, even when everything else felt wrong. I had prayed about it for months, begged God to change me, to take this feeling away. He never did. Instead he gave me Tiffany, and now he was watching my father lose his mind over it. Dad's face turned the color of the tomato sauce on the wall. "Raelyn, Grace, you will explain yourself right now. This is not how we raised you. This is sin. This is against everything we believe." His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the hurt beneath the rage. The fear that his little girl was slipping away into something he couldn't control or fix with a sermon. Mother started crying softly, whispering prayers under her breath. Jake muttered something about disgusting before grandmother's gaze shifted to him and he shut up instantly. Emily just stared at her plate. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. How do you explain to the people who taught you right from wrong that the wrong they see feels like the only right thing in your life? Tiffany squeezed my hand again. A silent promise that she was here, that we were in this together. But as the sauce continued to drip and the silence stretched on because of grandmother's unmoving presence, I realized the real battle had only just begun. This was not going to be a quick apology and a family hug. This was going to tear us apart piece by piece, and I was the one holding the match. The silence broke when Dad grabbed another plate and hurled it too. This one empty, but the crash still loud enough to make my mother flinch. "Get out of my house," he said, pointing at Tiffany, his fingers shaking. "You are not welcome here. You have corrupted my daughter." Tiffany stood slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She looked at me, waiting for me to say something, to defend us, but my throat had closed up. Grandmother still hadn't moved. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. And that stillness somehow made Dad's anger feel smaller, like a storm raging against a mountain that refused to budge. I finally found my voice. "Dad, please. Tiffany isn't corrupting anyone. I love her. This isn't a choice I made to hurt you. It just is." The words tasted foreign coming out of my mouth in this house where we never talked about feelings, only faith and duty. Mother gasped like I'd slapped her. "Love. Raelyn, the Bible says it's an abomination. Leviticus, Romans, Corinthians, all of it. How can you stand there and say that to your own father?" Her voice trembled with the weight of every Sunday school lesson she had drilled into me since I was 5. Jake pushed his chair back. "This is messed up. What are the guys at church going to say? Dad's the deacon. Emily finally spoke, her tone softer but no less cutting. You could have told us privately. You didn't have to spring it on us like this at dinner. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Privately? In a house where every door had ears and every prayer mentioned the lost souls in the family? Tiffany picked up her purse, her shoulders straight even though I could see the hurt in her eyes. I'll go, she said quietly. Raelyn, call me when you can. As she walked toward the door, grandmother finally stirred. She reached out and took my hand in her cool, papery one. Child, she said, her voice low and steady like it always was when she told stories about the Great Depression. Love is never simple. But neither is family. Those words hung in the air longer than Dad's shouting ever could. No one argued back. No one dared. It was the first time in my life I saw my father look uncertain. He sank into his chair, the fight draining out of him as grandmother's simple statement echoed. That night I lay in my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck on the ceiling when I was 10. Back when I still believed God had a perfect plan for me that looked exactly like my parents' life. Tiffany texted me once. I'm at the motel by the highway. I love you. We don't have to do this alone. I cried until my pillow was soaked, wondering if loving her meant losing everything else. The next morning the house was quiet in a way it never had been. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what grandmother's next move would be. Because whatever she had started with that single sentence, it had changed the battlefield. Dad didn't throw anything else. He just avoided my eyes at breakfast, and Mother prayed louder than usual over her coffee. I knew the real conversations were coming, the ones that would force us all to look at the cracks in the foundation we had called faith and family. 3 days later the arguments started in earnest. Dad called a family meeting after dinner. The same dining table now scrubbed clean of sauce stains, but still carrying the memory of flying plates. Grandmother sat at the head again, knitting something soft and blue that might have been a baby blanket for the church nursery. She hadn't said another word about Tiffany or me since that night, but her presence kept the volume down. Dad opened his Bible to the well-worn pages in Romans. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. He read it slowly, like each word was a nail in the coffin of my future. Raelyn, this isn't about hate. This is about saving your soul. I sat across from him with my own notebook full of verses I had looked up at the library. The ones about love and grace and not judging. Dad, Jesus never said anything about this. He ate with tax collectors and sinners. He talked about loving your neighbor. Mother interrupted, her eyes red from nights of crying. But Paul did. And Paul spoke for God. Honey, we raised you better than this. Think about your future, marriage, children, the life God planned. Her voice broke on the word children, and I felt the knife twist because I had dreamed of those things too, just not the version she pictured. Jake stayed quiet this time, scrolling on his phone but listening. Emily surprised me by speaking up. I looked it up online. There are churches that accept this now. Maybe we don't have to lose her. Dad shot her a look that could have frozen fire. We are not that kind of church. We follow the word, not the world. The debate went on for hours. I talked about the pain of hiding who I was, about the nights I prayed to be straight, and woke up still loving Tiffany. Dad countered with stories of people who left the lifestyle and found peace in God. Mother kept returning to tradition, how her own mother had married young and raised a godly home. Grandmother knitted without looking up, but every time the voices rose too high her needles would pause, and the room would quiet like someone had turned down the volume on a radio. By midnight I was exhausted. I didn't choose this to rebel. I fought it for years, but denying it was killing me inside. Dad stood up, his face tired instead of angry. Then you are choosing the world over your family. I won't watch you walk into hell. He left the room, and Mother followed, leaving Emily, Jake, and me with grandmother. She set down her knitting and looked at me for the first time since the dinner. Your father is scared, child. Not just for your soul, but for the life he understands. Fear makes people throw plates and quote verses like weapons. Her words weren't permission or condemnation. They were simply truth, and somehow that made the pain sharper because it meant no one was the villain here. We were all just people trying to hold on to what we believed was right, and in the process we were breaking each other. The next week I moved out. Not dramatically, just packed 2 suitcases and drove to the motel where Tiffany had been staying. She opened the door in her pajamas, and we held each other for a long time without speaking. The room smelled like cheap coffee and hope. "We can figure this out," she whispered. "College is almost over. We can get an apartment in Austin." I nodded against her shoulder, but part of me was still back in that dining room listening to Dad's voice crack. Grandmother showed up 2 days later. She didn't knock, just waited on the sidewalk until I saw her through the window. I stepped outside, heart hammering. She handed me a paper bag with homemade biscuits and a folded note. "Your mother misses you at breakfast," she said simply. No lecture, no Bible verses. Just biscuits and that quiet way of hers that made you feel seen without being judged. "Your father is reading more than usual. Not just the usual passages. He's reading the ones about mercy too." She didn't ask me to come home. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She simply squeezed my hand the same way she had at dinner, and walked back to her old Buick. That small act opened a door I didn't know was there. Mother started texting me pictures of the garden, asking if Tiffany liked tomatoes. Jake sent a meme about college life that wasn't mean for once. Emily called one night crying, saying she was scared for me, but also proud that I was brave enough to be honest. Dad didn't text, but he didn't call the pastor to pray for my deliverance either. The family was fracturing and healing in the same breath, and I didn't know which part would win. Tiffany and I found a tiny apartment near campus. We cooked simple meals together, studied for finals, and slowly let ourselves be normal. Holding hands in public felt like freedom and guilt at the same time. Every Sunday I drove past our old church and felt the pull. The hymns I knew by heart, the people who had watched me grow up. I started reading the Bible again, not to prove anyone right or wrong, but to find my own place in it. Some verses still stung. Others felt like they were written for exactly this moment of confusion and love. Tiffany never pushed. She just listened when I cried and held me when the doubt got loud. Then the call came. Mother said grandmother had fallen and was in the hospital. Nothing serious, just a broken hip, but at 87 it was enough to scare us all. I drove back to the house with Tiffany beside me for the first time since the dinner. Dad opened the door. He didn't smile, but he didn't slam it either. "She's asking for you," he said, looking past me to Tiffany. "Both of you." The words were quiet, almost reluctant, but they were there. In the hospital room, grandmother looked small against the white sheets, but her eyes were the same steady gray. She took my hand and Tiffany's in each of hers. "Love is patient," she whispered, quoting Corinthians in a way that didn't feel like a weapon. "Love is kind." Dad stood in the corner, arms crossed, listening. No one threw anything. No one shouted. But the air was thick with everything still unsaid. Grandmother recovered slowly. She moved back home with a walker and strict orders to rest. I started visiting every Saturday, sometimes with Tiffany, sometimes alone. The conversations were careful, like walking across thin ice. Dad would sit in his recliner reading the newspaper, while we talked about school and weather and everything except the one thing that still divided us. Mother baked extra pies and left them on the counter for me to take home. "For both of you," she said once, and those 3 words felt like a bridge being built one plank at a time. The real test came at Christmas. The whole family gathered again at the same dining table, this time with a new tablecloth to cover the scars on the wall. Grandmother insisted everyone come. She sat at the head as always, her knitting needles clicking softly. Dad carved the turkey with more force than necessary. I sat beside Tiffany, our hands visible on the table instead of hidden underneath. No one commented. Jake passed the rolls. Emily asked Tiffany about her classes. Mother kept refilling glasses. It was almost normal, except for the tension humming beneath every polite sentence. After dinner, grandmother asked me to help her to the porch swing. We sat in the cold Texas night wrapped in quilts. "Your father is trying," she said. "He goes to the church study group now and listens to the young pastor talk about grace instead of just law. He doesn't understand yet, but he's listening." She looked at the stars the same way I used to look at the glow-in-the-dark ones on my ceiling. "I never told you this, but my sister loved a woman once. Back in the 40s when people didn't talk about such things. She chose the family over her heart, and regretted it every day until she died." Her voice didn't waver. I watched her choose what everyone said was right, and watched the light go out of her eyes. I won't watch that happen to you. I cried then, the kind of crying that comes from deep in the chest where all the secrets had been stored. Grandmother held me like she had when I was small and scared of thunderstorms. You will lose pieces of this family, she said. Some may never come back. But you will also find pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing. The choice isn't between right and wrong anymore. It's between living and just surviving. When we went back inside, Dad was washing dishes. He didn't look at me, but he left the best piece of pie on the counter with a note that said, "For Raelyn and Tiffany." Small. Careful. But there. Spring came and with it graduation. Tiffany and I walked across the stage together, our families in separate sections of the auditorium. Dad sat beside Mother, his tie straight, his face unreadable. Grandmother waved from her seat, her walker parked beside her. After the ceremony, we met in the parking lot. Dad shook Tiffany's hand. It was brief, but it happened. "Congratulations," he said, and the word didn't sound forced. Mother hugged me so tight I could feel her heart beating against mine. "We're proud of you," she whispered. "Both of you." Jake gave me a fist bump. Emily took pictures like nothing had ever been broken. We moved to Austin for jobs, small ones but ours. I started seeing a counselor who helped me untangle faith from fear. Tiffany and I built a life that felt honest, complete with Sunday brunches instead of church pews and friends who didn't flinch when we held hands. But the losses were real. Some cousins stopped inviting us to weddings. The annual family reunion photo had a noticeable gap where we used to stand. Dad still called every Sunday night, but the conversations stayed surface level, safe topics only. Grandmother visited once, bringing her knitting and stories. She never said, "I told you so." She just sat on our tiny balcony and watched the sunset like it was the most important thing in the world. One evening I drove back to the old house alone. Dad was in the garage working on an old truck. I helped him hand tools like I did when I was 12. After a long silence he spoke. "I still don't understand it, Raelyn. But I see you're happy. And Grandmother keeps reminding me that God is bigger than my understanding." He wiped grease from his hands. "I threw a lot of plates that night. I'm sorry for the mess I made." I nodded, tears threatening again. "I made a mess too, Dad. I hid who I was for so long it almost broke me." We didn't hug. We didn't pray together. But we stood in the same garage and accepted that neither of us had all the answers. Back in Austin that night I sat on the balcony with Tiffany. The city lights stretched out like stars we could actually touch. Grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "You will lose pieces, but you will find pieces too." I had lost the version of faith that fit neatly inside my parents' house. I had lost the easy approval that came with pretending. But I had found a love that didn't need to hide, a self that didn't flinch, and a family that was learning, slowly and painfully, to stretch instead of break. In the end, was choosing my heart over the tradition I was raised in the right decision? Or did I tear my family apart forever?